Okay, welcome back to my channel. My name is Derek Main and I review translated literature. Excuse me, that's to get my vocal cords right. So today we are going to review The Incompletes by Sergio Chejfec, and it is translated from the Spanish by Heather Cleary. This is an open letter publication. I've talked about that press a few times. They're up in Rochester. And do absolutely great work. So I was really excited to get this. I think you can see kind of the first thing I'm going to mention is how worn this book is. This is a fairly slim, about 180 pages. But it took me a while to get through. And I think that has to do with the world that you are sort of immediately going to go into, which is an aimless world. This book celebrates aimlessness, I think. There are really two primary characters. There's Felix, who our narrator was friends with long ago and is now following and imagining some of his travels. Felix has, left South America, left Buenos Aires, and for most of the time that we're in this book, he is in a hotel in Germany, I believe. There's not a lot of the geography of where it is isn't super important, but I believe it's in Germany. And so we are ruminating a lot on his journey, his aimlessness, and the fact that he kind of celebrates that. That's sort of the life that he wants for himself. And the hotel that he's staying in, the proprietor, the woman who is such an important part of the hotel that it is kind of her, I would call it like a second appendage. Her name is Maisha, and Maisha is also, I would say, aimless in her own way, in that the hotel is sort of a comfort and a trap, a cage kind of idea. And so her aimlessness is in her head, really questioning what she should be doing with her life. Is it okay that her sole purpose is this rundown old hotel that people don't really visit anymore? It's got some strange secrets. It's sort of a real life and geography on its own. So that's sort of what the novel explores. But I want to start off by saying that I liked the writing a lot. And I think this is a good book. I just think that it didn't land for me. And one of the first things that a lot of the reviews, as well as the wonderful open letter sends when you have a subscription, a wonderful letter kind of explaining maybe the publication history or a little bit about the author and story. And they also mention this. It's on the back page. And that's the first sentence. And the first sentence is tremendous. Now I'm going to tell the story of something that happened one night years ago and the events of the morning and afternoon that followed. And when you read something like that, I think you're kind of immediately sucked in. You know where you're going, and you feel like you're in the hands of someone who is really going to take you on this journey. We do go on a journey, but it is not, because aimlessness is what I find to be the thematic quality of the book, it has a hard time hooking me in. That first sentence kind of promises sort of more of a plot-heavy scenario than we get. There's definitely situations and events that kind of come up, small ones, but significant for the characters. And I have no issue with that. I usually love that in my writing. There is not, or in my reading, there is not cut and dry finality to anything. Again, something else I love. But one thing that there is a lot of is getting inside these two people's heads, Felix and Maisha, as they sort of philosophize about kind of everything. The meaning of everyday objects, their place in the world, how they take up space, the lack of meaning in everyday objects as well. Sort of the type of people who walk around and are kind of cataloging everything and putting them into a philosophical blender, if you will, and trying to figure out where that meaning lies and what their role is within that meaning and within the broader scope of the world. I love that kind of stuff, but it has done so much here that this is the first book I've read by Sergio Chejfec. As I was reading it, I actually thought it was a first novel. I thought it was a debut because of that old cliche of like kind of throwing everything out there in a book. And philosophically, I feel that he does this, and maybe a little too much. It took to about 120 out of a 180-page book before I could start really feeling like I was in the world. A lot of times as I was reading this, it was stop and start, rereading whole paragraphs. I liked it, but I didn't sense a lot of joy as a reader as I was going through it. You know, there wasn't something that hooked me in and made me feel really engrossed in the story. I don't think that is the fault of the writer. Certainly not the translator. The translation seems very, very good. I think that this is a fragmentary novel that is almost meant to be on your bedside to pick up and read 15 to 20 pages of. And then maybe 6 weeks later you notice it and you pick it up and you read 10 to 15 pages. And I think you could enjoy it maybe more in that way. The way that I typically read, I've never mentioned this before, but I don't read more than one book at a time. And I stick with books through the end almost always, with very rare exceptions. So I'm usually ready to sort of go into the deep end immediately and be in an author and a story's head. And this novel isn't really, I don't think, meant for that. And so it's not really the style that is going to attract me for that reason. But there's some really interesting things, of course, when you throw everything out there philosophically and when you're in two people's heads so much, there's lots of things to ruminate on. I wanted to go over a few of them. On page 38, one of the big themes is the hotel itself there in, again, I think Germany. And in this sense, there's some metafiction tricks going on, I think, that make it seem like the hotel might be a metaphor for the novel itself. If not this novel, then just novels in general. So I've highlighted this section on 38. The Hotel Sagada had an accessible form that unfolded the deeper inside you went. A guest's first impression would be that the place was too big, and that its size translated into an unusual complexity. As an object, however, it turned out to be both multifaceted and uniform, and as such, could not stand up to lengthy cataloging. I felt a lot about that, about the book. It has an accessible form. It unfolds. The deeper you get into it, it feels like it has an unusual complexity. But at the end, I was left wanting. I was left wondering if this was the purpose, to leave me wanting. But it didn't leave me wanting in that sort of excited way that, you know, say maybe a Bolaños story that has no real, there are 2666, right? There's no finite conclusion. We don't know how much of that is because it was maybe unfinished. We don't know how much of that is because of the sections. You know, that sort of mystery that exists, and I think it also exists in the Third Reich as well with his work. I like that because it's an undercurrent throughout life. Here, the undercurrent is within these two characters. And specifically, the narrator is narrating his own impression of the two characters as they're out there in this hotel and in this world. So there's an unreliableness there as well, because it's not as if we were getting Felix's thoughts. The narrator has been sent postcards. From these postcards, he's extrapolating this whole story. And in that way, I do kind of like that idea of, I'm someone who has had friends go off into the wind, right? Traveling the world and living really, really interesting lives that are simultaneously exciting but also lonely. And these people certainly fit that bill. And I think I could have used a little more of the narrator's own perspective of that, how he felt as the sort of stable friend, you know, the one with this set place and geography that is his, and that he, his domain, and how he feels sort of watching from afar a friend who is going to take a different route. And there's some of that, but I could have used a little more of the narrator in there. We get so deep into the mind of Felix, so deep into the mind of Mesha, and again, it's the mind through another mind. So there's some unreliableness there that, I don't know, doesn't always work for me. But there's a lot of course, meaning, since we're talking about philosophy, in there. And we've got, on page 57, something I thought was very interesting and also bleak. It's an idea that is certainly well trodden at this point. I think a lot of us readers understand it. This is just one quick sentence. Felix was not trying to peek in on another anonymous story. He knew there were no more meanings left to discover in life. And that makes me very sad when I read that. I think it could be true. I definitely understand the sentiment, and yet it can still make me sad, because I don't want to feel as if we live in a world where meaning is done being explored. Because if that's the case, and if this is sort of the culmination of all of our philosophy, ideas, traveling, exploration, I think we have ultimately landed on an unsatisfying, lonely, and ultimately kind of depressing world. And that's dark. You want to feel the hope, and the anticipation is in the idea that there is something there beyond the horizon, something else left to discover, uncover, to grasp, something to hold on to and see anew, or some way to show someone, such as your kids or your lover or your friends, to be able to see life through their eyes, something new and fresh. And so that was a little sad, and I felt that Felix had that idea that his aimlessness was sort of a protest against the fact that there was no more meanings. There was nothing sturdy for him to put his feet down on. So he kind of chooses aimlessness as a default to be able to just sort of float through this life in the time that we get. And that's tough for me to philosophically, not the book, but philosophically, that can be tough for me. There's a section on the purpose of the story and also the purpose of Mesha's life on page 77, which I highlighted and found really interesting. Mesha did not want her book to be about lessons learned in a traditional sense, or for it to center on one or several intrigues that are ultimately resolved. It should be the story of sentimental misadventures that were above all difficult to pin down, also of practical ones, though not to the point of overshadowing the others. Come to think of it, the novel needed to be like a tale of the high seas, but without a traveler or a journey, and should unfold in single frames of situations or moments, displaying supposedly important aspects of her life. That is very much what this book is like. It unfolds in situations and moments that are meant to explain important aspects of the character's life and of life in general. And this, again, I guess I do like novels and do like stories that have a traveler or have a journey. I think that those stories are still important. All of us are on different wavelengths and places when it comes to where we're at in our lives. We all have different ages and experiences, taste, and backgrounds, that a journey that may be a very familiar one could be entirely new to you. And these characters seem to have adopted the idea that because this journey of life has been taken by other travelers before, even though they didn't get to experience it, there's nothing left to uncover through their own experience. I find that a little depressing, but I did like how succinct that is of an explanation for what Mesha wants out of her life and her book. Now, Felix also discusses his purpose in life. This is much later on 179. It includes the best portion of the entire book because it is so late. I don't necessarily want to spoil anything, but the analogy has to do with a hammer, and it has to do with destruction. So if we cannot create anything new, if we cannot discover anything new, that next logical step that our mind goes to is, well, then we can tear down and we can destruct. In this sense, there's not an idea of any rebuilding again. That's kind of what political revolution is about, and I support and am 100% in step with that idea of tearing down systems to hopefully try to build, contain, and foster new ideas and new systems. This is sort of a fantasy just about, and I'm only talking about this one analogy, not the whole book, but this is a fantasy just about the actual destruction, which is less enticing to me if there is not something beyond the destruction. But come to think of it, this stasis was what I wanted for my own life. Not inaction, but rather the absence of change, and also a task that would justify my existence to others. I find that is very, very good. A task that justifies my existence to others. I think so many of us are looking for that in modernity. The meaning of work has failed many of us. There is this idea of find something you love and then you won't work a day in your life. And it just sounds like that crap self-help BS. Many of us have got to work in slogging jobs that are absolutely no fun because, that's the society and the economic situation, at least here in the West and specifically in America, that it's been set up. But many of us are looking for that task that would justify my existence to others. Now, I don't want that justify my existence to others personally to be something where it is a heralded existence. In other words, I don't think that the justification needs to be always external. Yes, others see you and others experience you and your task and what you're doing, but your innate happiness can't just come right from others and how what prism they might view you from. There has to be something a little more spiritual, for lack of a better word. There has to be something more internalized. You have to find some sort of peace. And I think when you do that first, then the justification of the task through others can then follow. This doesn't take that approach. I mean, this takes an approach of, some task that would justify my existence to others. But I thought about it quite a lot. I'm still kind of mulling it over and thinking about it. And it does seem apropos for Felix and how he is living his life. There is an aimlessness, and his one goal is that right there, which is, I'd like to accomplish something that others would then say, Felix did that. This is who Felix was. All of this aimlessness served this purpose. So that's my review. In a nutshell, it was difficult for me to get through this book. It didn't land for me. It didn't work for me. I liked the writing. I liked some of the ideas throughout it. I found it to be very depressing. Ironically, when I first saw the title and the beautiful cover, The Incompletes, I thought the story was going to be incomplete and was going to be fragmented. Certainly it's fragmented in the sense that the narrator is picking up fragments such as the postcards and the letters and putting together a narrative, but it is not incomplete. I think we get a very complete view of Felix and of Mesha, who are the main characters. And it is ultimately philosophically and psychologically unsatisfying to me. That does not mean it is not good, because there are many novels, films, and also many aspects of life that are ultimately spiritually, psychologically, and philosophically unsatisfying. And we do ourselves a disfavor when we do not acknowledge that, when we do not sense and feel that, or when we try to hide or run from that. So I have no problem with sort of a depressing book. I'm not even sure if this book was meant to be like that. I think this really is a conflict between me, who I am as a person, and this writer. I think that we are in a conversation and perhaps a disagreement. I'm actually looking forward to reading some more. I'm going to get on Open Letter and perhaps do some back catalog looking and seeing if there's something that looks more up my alley, or to see if I've got a little philosophical nemesis here in a writer. So that's my review for today. Next up is going to be what was my most anticipated read of 2019, Vernon Subutex by Virginie Despentes. It is translated from the French by Frank Wynne, and it's an FSG original. We're going to dive full into this, so I'm not even going to give the traditional little blurb. this was my most anticipated book, so we're going to find out how I felt about it. That's it for today. Be good, everybody, and be good to folks.